Good evening. We're online and we're having around this round table with Mr. Alexander Voloshin, who has been the head of he was the chief of staff of the Russian president between 1991 and 2001. One of the questions which is of great importance to us is to understand what is of importance to you in here. In different periods of my life, I did different things, and I had different interests and preoccupations. I'm more often asked about my work in the presidential administration, but there are different things who have been of interest to me. Let me try to start this online talk with the questions coming from our online audience. And let me start by asking a question about Russia. The tyranny of the majority. In the first half of the 19th century, Russia was viewed as a somewhat an antipode of the United States empire. At this time, this author was writing, said that today we have two nations in the world moving towards the same goal, albeit in very different ways: the Anglo-Saxon world and the Russians. In Russia, the power is concentrated in the hands of one person. In America, it is distributed. I think that such a vision of Russia is somewhat offensive, but I do often meet my compatriots, people in Russia, who share my thought and who impart to me an opinion that in Russia nothing depends on a single individual citizen. Indeed, if I think that this is not just about the society being in the infancy, and that the citizens do not stand up for their rights adequately. I think that there is an momentum coming from the authorities, because we know that those who had to combat the serfdom in the European countries had to do it in a consistent way. Do you share an opinion that the serfdom in Russia still subsists in the consciousness, in the mind? And what is your general view of Russia today? Well, I think that this phrase is a lot more pertinent to the past, and I do not particularly like to divide the nations between the great and the non-great nations. And of course, Russia has unfortunately had a long period of tyranny, and the current history of Russian democracy is not particularly long. It only starts from of the 1980s, so we're indeed talking about 25 years of this experience, which is not a particularly long period historically for a mature society to evolve. We believe, and I believe, that some of the processes that we're seeing today, and one of the major processes which is unfolding in Russia today, is the birth of the civic society, and we may have, I think that we have made some progress on this path. I think that the civic society in Russia has developed. and is continuing to develop, and even though we would certainly welcome a much swifter development of the civic society, we have to confess to ourselves and to each other that it may well take a whole generation for civic society to emerge and get established for the. So we are in many ways a country in transition. We are passing through a very difficult transition phase between our Soviet past and the future. And as a country in transition, Russia has great peculiarities. I would certainly not speak about any momentous or fate deciding differences between Russia and other nations. I think that Russia is a big country which has a great mosaic of nations and ethnicities. It is a country which is very different in its religious and ethnic. It is a country where people of different religions and religious denominations live together. The Orthodox, the Muslims, the Buddhists, the Catholics, but I would say that which is divided in linguistic terms. It is subdivided in religious terms, and I think that in many ways it is a unique country and creates certain difficulties. But I think it would be clearly wrong to say that Russia is not destined for democracy and that democracy will never get established. Well, I think that this is a profoundly wrong view. I think that a certain democratic system has already been built in Russia, and I think that while perfect democracy is certainly not attainable anywhere, I think that we, let me repeat myself, we are entering and going a very laborious phase of transition, and I think that we do have some achievements. Well, if I may continue with asking a question from Nina Korikova, one of our alumnus, who says that it is indeed quite I welcome your words that we continue with this democratic transition, but the general impression is that civic activity is being repressed, and it may even be that citizens feel that their civic urge is not welcome or is not approved. If somebody goes for a street rally, he or she may face detention, or he or she may lose the job if the journalist writes something in the newspaper. But I would certainly welcome that diversity being as a great creed of Russia as a nation, as a country. And clearly diversity is we're at the same time Malevich and Shishkin. We're at the same time Far East and North Caucasus. We're very glad that you're starting with this I-class, Alexander Stalyevich. My question is that every political arrangement is a part of culture. Cultural values have a great influence on the political and economic vector of development. With that said, some cultures are more inclined for progress and some are less inclined for progress. Do you believe that the Russian society is moving away from democracy? No, this is a somewhat an elaborate question, but let me try to be quite direct in answering this question. First, I do not think that the government is trying to be is trying to follow in the lines of the Soviet past. I disagree with that. What I would certainly agree with, however, is that a great number of people in Russia do not wish to Soviet history in the history of Russia, because Stalin as a terrible tragedy in the history of Russia, led to the death and repression of millions of our compatriots. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that people lived and had children, lived their lives, created perennial beauty, and we cannot simply cut away this Soviet heritage from our history. I am reluctant to say that we are following in these lines politically, but I think that we have to respect our past with all its troubles and tragedies, and this is not to say that we have to continue with the idolatry of the tyrants of the Soviet past, but at least we should respect our traditions, even if some of these traditions evolved in the Soviet period of our history. So clearly that this Soviet past is one of the layers of our time. Certainly our reflexes, habits, customs, traditions still bear a lot of the Soviet legacy. It is clearly that we speak about our life of 25 years ago and not 125 years ago, because I'm not old enough to remember what was happening 125 years ago. I never lived at that time, but I certainly can refer of 25 years ago, because that's a part of my life experience and a part of my culture, like it or not. Our next question will be somewhat institutional in nature. The quotation from Tocqueville, from Alexis de Tocqueville, about the autocratic nature of the Russian political arrangement, Russian democracy, and you have said that the Russian democracy has had its commencement. So clearly the Russian system today is still greatly different from many European countries. It's a vertical in Russia, and the great powers of the Russian president act and are viewed as a unique political peculiarity of the Russian political arrangement. So the question of from one of our listeners is about the possibility of Russia ever passing to the parliamentary republic. Well, I do not think that only one person takes all decisions in Russia, although I concur that the powers of the Russian president are quite potent. But the specifics of Russia is, as I said, that it is a country in transition, country in the creation of its political institutions, and this tradition or this contemporaneity is only 25 years old. True democracy, if I may repeat myself, true democracy can only be simultaneous with the developed civil society. I think that this is not something that the government may foster or indeed dictate. I think that the opinions of people, the psychological and cultural traditions, and the willingness of the people to stand their ground are quite irrespective from or independent from the government. It is quite infrequent, either in Russia or in other countries. I think that no government or no president would ever be happy to be under the control of the civic society. I think that no government is particularly willing to be liable to the control from the civil society. But I think that the strong civil society may exercise such control, and clearly that in every country throughout history, civil society was developing in strong opposition to the government. With respect to the parliamentary republic, I think that the world has many different systems, but I'm not ready to say that a parliamentary republic is by definition more democratic than a presidential republic. I think that every country takes and follows a certain political tradition, and it is of some difference that we see that when a country goes through transition, clearly a parliamentary republic is always more conservative, and there is a lot more populism in a parliamentary republic. And for a country which is in transition, I think that the presidential system or presidential republic is more efficient. However, the more concentration we see in the hands of one person, the more the risks that this government will arrogate more power. But clearly we do not want to conserve the situation in Russia. Clearly we want to go forward and to develop it. So in this sense, I think that the parliamentary republic today for Russia may not be the best recipe. When a country is at a different stage of development, when there are strong political parties, when there's a well-developed civic society, there you may opt for either parliamentary or a political republic. But at the stage where we're in today, a presidential republic is to be preferred. While we are while we live in this presidential republic, there is the question about the institute of presidency. There is a question from Maria Gureva from St. Petersburg, who is asking a question about the recent disappearance of the Russian president from the media. And she's asking a question if there are any regulations which would determine the actual standing order of the president of a country to appear before the public, and should indeed a president in a democratic country be liable or be accountable with respect to his or her president's work hours. To illustrate it with an example, if the public should know that the president is on a business trip or on the leave, or if he is sick at the hospital, well, I think that the president of Russia today certainly is an adherent to the tenet of showing, and I think that the president in Russia today is covered quite widely in the Russian media, including the meetings that the president has, the assemblies he attends, and his decisions are generally broadcast and covered. I think that the work of the president of Russia is documented quite amply as to the degree of transparency. I think that deals with the political traditions, and the political traditions are different in different countries. As to if a president is out of the public eye, I think that there may be a difference between countries. In some countries, it is not a particular public interest, and in some countries the population is a lot more attentive and may even be concerned about the breakfast menu of the president, or if the president has had a cold. But I think that this tradition is being of media coverage is only being established in Russia today, and in the old times, you might remember that the General Secretary of the Communist Party could well disappear for a month, and there were no instruments for the society to ask questions when would he be back. Now this situation is quite different in Russia today, and I think that the wide audience and the Russian society is well can see the president quite often. And even in those cases when the president has a cold or is sick, the president has to read and go through a process of reading documents, even if the president is taking ill. If you take a look at this aspect of the presidential activity, you'd see that he had a lot of things to do, even when he was off the radar screen, as they say. And I think that I have no insider in the presidential administration. I have no idea what was going on, and I think that he might have been taken ill. In any event, your question might be if the press secretary, the spokesman of the president, appear between the TV cameras, before the TV cameras in the morning, and say that the president has a flu. And I cannot give you an answer. What should the press secretary do? I think that in the Russian political tradition, it is not particularly it is not quite clear, and I think that there is nothing particularly serious that was happening with the president. He might have been having a bout of cold, but our tradition, in any way, our media tradition, is not giving us a clue. Well, I think that in the particular case, the absence of such a tradition may give us an interesting material, because some old photos and well, while we have agreed that this tradition is only being established, I think that subject matter may become the ground for the presidential staff to make some decisions and develop this tradition further. But if I repeat myself, when I was the head of the presidential administration, I cannot say that I have that I had a standing order or a clue and I remember working with President Yeltsin. Well, of course, he was an older, and his health was, of course, more compromised then, and I had to give some answers, and we even have had some stereotype answers, such as his handshake is strong as usual. But I think that nothing particularly drastic happened. It's quite normal for the society to have interest in the well-being of the president, but I think that this tradition is evolving and will continue to develop. I think that such a minor issues as toothache or the flu of the president should hardly become a focus of attention. But can we then talk a little bit about the Institute of Trust? Because starting from the 15th century, with, say, the crediting institutions evolving, people started to deliberate about trust as a political. I think that in politics it has a great importance. So what do you think is the basis for this Institute of Trust in Russia? One might say that in the 1990s and after the crisis of the beginning of the 90s, there was very little trust towards the Russian government, even though it seems to me that the citizens were quite active, and the civil society was developing, and I think that President Yeltsin asking to forgive him before his retirement, I think is also a sign of this trust. Well, are you talking about the written rules, about the written? No, I have. Well, it's a good question about really when we're asked about trust towards the president. If you, I think that this is somewhat different from a vernacular question of the do you respect me or do you trust me. I think that in the particular case, people who answer this question think it differently and interpret it differently. When you ask somebody, do you trust the president, it evokes a whole plethora of feelings, emotions, and opinions. People would say there are different meanings and connotations that people impart to answering the question about the trust towards the president or towards the government. I think that when you ask if you trust Vasily, Vasya, a man next door, that would be one thing. You would think about if he's a good man, if he can be relied on when you go to do something with your car, and if he can help you in the backyard shed. That's one thing. When you're asking about trust towards the president, then, as I said, we're dealing with a universe of answers, and I don't think there are any guidelines for using this trust. I think that people, when asking that question, they're trying to find out and answer for themselves if their life has or worse throughout the presidency of this particular person, and if the government may have a certain recourse to the lives of the particular citizen, or else, politically speaking, the life become worse, but still people do not blame the particular president in the economic hardships, and retain what we call trust towards the particular political figure. So there are no guidelines, there are no recipes, there are no written rules. I think that if a politician wants to keep the trust, this is in some ways a political art. It testifies to a certain, one has to say that this has to deal with some administrative capacity and some administrative talent, and it is also in some ways a matter of political luck. Some leaders may live and flourish in more or less politically favorable conditions, but let me say again that there are no guidelines. But I don't think that a false minded or a politician can be popular for a very long time. I don't think that a politician who is lying all the time can garner support and to be at the helm for too long. So if we talk about the recipes, indeed, I think that you have to work in the interest of people. You have to do it with faith, and you have to call it your duty. But if we get back to the past, do you believe that Stalin was trusted by the people, and how sincere he was to his nation? It is difficult to compare a time when information was not channeled at all, and when indeed no information was available to people. I think that the situation is dramatically different today. People can receive information from millions of sources, from your iPad, from the iPhone, from people may argue and say and criticize the state television, and even though the TV is influenced by the government, however, this society is quite open, and if anybody wants to receive some information, there are ways to obtain information. And I think that even there may be some limitations in access to information. However, it is clear that the vast majority of people in Russia have ways to obtain information, not just from the state run channels. I think that it would be wrong to compare this time, the time where we live in Russia's history, with the period of Stalin, when the information was strictly limited. Yes, we can say that our democracy may be far from to be desired. We may say that our political traditions are far to be desired. However, let me say again that people have freedom of information. Alexander Stalovich, every time we meet, I have a general so I get calm. I get some calm, and and you do exude calm. So you're saying that I can be a good psychologist or psychotherapist. Well, I'm just trying to say is that every time when we meet, there is this great feeling of of calm and the developing political tradition. However, the question from our alumnus is that how would you compare um, uh, your time as the presidential chief of staff, head of presidential administration? Would you say that what we have seen in the past 10 years are a plan, or more of a accidental thing, such as the return of Mr. Putin to the president's office, or the crisis in the Ukraine? Could you predict this? Well, frankly, I have never been involved in political prognostication. I have never tried to predict, but we live in a country which is not in a vacuum, and we live on a planet which has a great complexity. I have never predicted or tried to build prognoses for the planetary development in political terms. This is not to say that the activities or the acts of the political leaders cannot be planned or predicted, but I think that when we say that the civic society is developing, I think that it is developing quite rapidly, not just because Mr. Putin or Mr. Medvedev are watering this civic society, not that, but because that the people are very quietly but steadily integrating into this new reality, and in some ways this is quite runs a counter to what the government may want. In the 20th century, we had a very long period without democracy and without the private property. Today, for the past 25 years, we have had some great changes. Other countries have gone through this democratic shift much earlier. Historical processes develop civic society is evolving in Russia. Some political preferences are tend to arise. This is not a rapid, swift process. You may see on the example of the history of other nations that this may be a period of decades. Those who work in the Kremlin today clearly try to look at the processes, at these processes from the historical perspective. But this is not to say that we can predict what will happen with the political arrangement on the planet in 10 years. The economic driving forces change. Our colleagues and partners, there are different things. The coup d'etats happen. So the world is quite complex. So let's not try to get involved with the prognostication. everything. So, in other words, you say that what we have seen in Russia for the past several years, one may say that this shift in the vector, this shift of vector from the 1990s, such as the anti-Western turn, the conflict with the Ukraine, is more a reactive thing. No, we disagree. Yeah, yes, I disagree. I disagree. First of all, we're speaking about two different stages of the historical development. The 1990s were a revolutionary period in Russia. At the turn of the century, of the 21st century, we went to the more evolutionary phase. With respect to your question about the pro-Western or the sentiment, I think that the Russian policies have never been pro-Western or anti-Western. They have more or less been always quite pragmatic, and I think that our relations with the West were a complex of different, very difficult and multifaceted circumstances. When President Yeltsin was president, President Yeltsin had very warm relations with, say, President Clinton. However, towards the end of Mr. Yeltsin's presidency, the relations with the West were quite were definitely far from being rosy, and I personally was a member of some negotiations which were far from being friendly. And where did this come from? This evolved in for several reasons. The war in Yugoslavia, which was perceived in very negative terms in the Russian society, which indeed was the first, the cause of the first surge of anti-Americanism in the Russian society, and President Yeltsin himself was quite critical of our American partners' position in the Balkans. The position of our Western colleagues with respect to the situation in the Chechen Republic and the North Caucasus on the whole were also not fostering friendship between Russia and the West. So I may say that during the presidency of Mr. Putin, they have different stages. There were stages of more or less friendly relations. Let us remember that the war in Iraq was criticized not only by Russia but also by some of the European partners, including Germany. I think many today quite evident that the military campaign in Iraq was a failure. 5,000 casualties and the terrible mess in Iraq and the administration, the U.S. administration's faulty policies in Iraq led to over 100,000 deaths. Indeed, we were against the beginning of the Iraqi military campaign, and I think that we were right. But indeed, that led to a great cooling in the relations, in our relations with the US. At the same time, I think that these are some waves. These waves are, I think that in this sense one may say that our policies are reactive. we do not have to support our Western partners if we believe that their policies are wrong, and if these mistakes of the Western politics influence our interests, this may indeed lead to further aggravations, of which a classical example is the situation in the Ukraine. So I would not go as far as to say that in the 1990s we were great friends with the West, and then we indeed got great, or then we stopped being friends. But this is a very interesting topic. I remember how the civilized world, including Russia, did not understand many of the American policies. But my question is more about the civic society. What is indeed the manifestation of the civic society? When we speak about the 1990s, I remember that elections are indeed and the involvement in the elections were a great thing. Going to the streets was also a way to manifest yourself. There were more social organizations. There was more freedom in the press. The cafes in Moscow were quite vibrant in political talk. So in this sense, by what parameters should the civic society continue to widen? Well, I think that the civic society is not about kitchen talk. Civic society is not about cafe political discussions, although this is a part of it. Even as some 3 to 4 years ago, there were no volunteer organizations in Russia. When, say, at times of crisis or times of natural calamity, people volunteer and come together in some groups, and this may be done, this may run counter to what the government is doing, or it may be developing in an alliance with what the government is doing. So even 4 years ago, the volunteer movement was not existent in Russia, but I think that after Krimsk it started to evolve. The government was first quite tense, but then it got relaxed, and I think that the volunteer organizations is a good example of how the civil society is developing. So I think that there are many different things. You may be right that there was a time of greater street process, or street associations and street rallies, but I think that this is only one of the manifestations of the civil society. And I certainly agree that the demonstration, or a public demonstration, is a very visual and candid manifestation of civic society. However, there are some dramatic periods in life, and now we see less rallies. But periodically we see how people go start to the streets, and it may even be when people feel quite disenchanted with what the federal or the regional authorities are doing, and people do express their opinion. I think that this happens in a number of cases on a large scale. Well, there may be people who are willing to see street protest to be seen on an everyday basis. I'm not to say that this norm can ever be established, but I think that I'm more of a phlegmatic person, and I do not particularly like to go and join the rallies. I have and profess other forms of civic participation. I do it differently. Say, I support the school, for instance. This is also a contribution to the school. So I do not like going to the rallies. Even though I might be quite have great solidarity with what particular rallies do, but I think that there are different people who have different ways of civic participation. There are two questions from civic activists. One is simpler, from Dmitry Permякov. Alexander Stalevich, do you believe that anti-corruption civic activities are approved and can be approved, and why is the government well, I think that the fight against corruption is and a very important part of our life, and I think that the corruption in Russia is a great social ill, and I think that people must and the civic society must influence the authorities and contribute to the fight against corruption. Within the civil society, there are of course always people who want to make a sort of a political career, and then there can be a difference of genre. It's either you're against corruption or you're trying to build your political career on the fight against corruption. When the government, when the authorities are feeling that this is just a political argument, then clearly the government is negative about that. If there are some social forces which are fighting against corruption, this may also cause discomfort, and I think that this is a fertile layer of the civic society. I think that the containing the corruption and the fight against corruption have a great future in Russia. I think that those healthy social forces which try to withstand the corruption in Russia will eventually find their way, and even I sincerely believe that the fight against corruption will not be successful without a great public-private partnership, without a great cooperation between the government and the civic society. Unfortunately, however, the fight against corruption is never and nowhere smooth. I think that every time when the government is trying to contain such efforts, and the government is always has a great persuasion in saying that why it should classify this or that information. I think that in this sense we are not radically different from other nations, from other countries, except that the civic society in this country is indeed in only the nascent stage. And the transparency as a political tradition does not have those hundreds of years of history as they do in some other countries. And as a citizen, Mr. Voloshin, what do you think would be efficient to force the authorities to cooperate with the civic society? Well, I think that the civic society, the society must be active. I think that there's some, of course, very difficult and complicated stories when they a high-ranking official is criticized for corruption, and there can be different cases. That I can understand when a high-ranking official is trying to protect himself. But the one thing I do not understand, why is the society not active enough in fighting against corruption in the universities and colleges? We do know that this corruption is terrible when it is practiced in the universities and colleges. I think that this is indeed, but I think that the government would not be particularly interested to preserve the corruption in the universities. But where are the students, indeed, where would say act against the corrupted provost or corrupted president of the college? Or where are the student associations which would say that starting from this examination session we shall stop paying the bribes to our to those who are trying to force us to pay bribes for say the examination marks? So I think that if the students get together and start to withstand this, I think that let's try to combat this. This is certainly a place where we can work together. Well, Lee Kuan Yew, the late Lee Kuan Yew, the great leader of Singapore, had an opinion that the government of the country must be the initiator or the locomotive of change. He's credited with saying that a leader may have to start with his inner circle, dismissing his inner circle, and I think that well, thank you for your question. I'm not only saying that that the fight against corruption must only be grassroots. No, this is not to say that I do not believe that the government must play a part in that. These are two forces. There has to be the political will of the power of the government, but the government may not cope with the problem without the support of the society. And in the same way, the civic society would not be able to cope with the problem. Well, Lee Kuan Yew is a great success story in the world. There's no denying that. But I think that this is it's a small place. It is very compact. I think that the friends of Lee Kuan Yew, when indeed the managers of that country, well, our political society, so to speak, the political establishment, and has hundreds of people in them. We have over 80 governors in this country, and there's a great layer of people, and of course the situation is somewhat more sophisticated than it has ever been in Singapore, because the fight against corruption in and the execution in the great Chinese tradition of those from your inner circle. I think that the big country abides by a different reality. Just remember all those who were decimated for corruption in China. However, it did not lead to eradication of corruption in that great country. So we're talking about a somewhat different genre. I think that the Chinese are trying to contain corruption, but I cannot say that they achieved a tremendous success. Well, we're a smaller country in terms of population, and we have a civic society in Russia, unlike China, even though this country, I mean Russia, does not have a greatly developed civic society, but civic society is certainly stronger in Russia than it is in China. The second question is from Yelena Olshansky. The Odkazniki.ru Foundation, which works for the benefit of the orphans in Russia. And indeed, the deterioration of our relations with the West has been a tragic blow to the development of the movement for the rights of the orphans. This was and this also leads to the medical services, the inability to attract funds from the foreign sources. Unfortunately, charity in Russia is not developed to the extent when the orphans could indeed subsist by just the Russian originating charity. And of course, the general Yelena Olshanska is asking, in this period of the great cooling of the relations between Russia and the West, do you believe that the relations with the West will ever warm again? Well, I think that the question is for the people to be able to install and to pay fees like the Greenpeace. Well, I think that there are different charities, different there are charities which secure and get their financing both in Russia and abroad. Yes, downside. Indeed, there are non-politicized organizations which manage to secure financing both inside Russia and from the West, both on an individual and corporate level. I do not exclude that some cases are clear when the organizations Greenpeace is quite a politicized organization in terms of its activities, and sometimes it seems, or certainly appears, that the politics make a great part of the Greenpeace, and to me, as a side observer, it seems that Greenpeace is a political organization, and but you should probably agree that the help to the sick children is somewhat different from the Greenpeace. I think that the Green parties in many countries are great political forces in Europe and elsewhere, and indeed I think that in the Greenpeace there can be very important aspects. Let us take their environmental programs, but in some cases, of course, the Greenpeace was an actor in the political processes in different countries. So I think that if such legislation which precludes organizations from securing foreign financing, if it's on the way of helping orphan children, this is pretty bad. This has to be dealt with. And I'm not a great supporter of the current legislation in the sphere of the NGOs and the financing of the NGOs. I understand that what the problem that was that the lawmakers were trying to address. I think that foreign money should not play in the internal politics, and I think that Russia, as a sovereign country, must and should protect itself from the foreign money entering the Russian political arena. However, this legislation is somewhat murky and opaque in the way it has been structured. So I think that there is a lot to be done to make this legislation more coherent and consistent. So much so for the charities. As to our relations with the so-called West, although it is not a solidified phenomenon, the West. So I think that this situation is very complex, and we shall not resolve this situation easily or in any way soon. It is a separate and very long conversation as to who made mistakes and at what periods. And I think that some of the mistakes that the West, the collective West, made were quite serious. And if we get back to the beginning of last year, we remember that on the crest of the dissatisfaction of with the President Yanukovych's unwillingness to sign the association agreement with the European Union, and we remember that this protests were quite peaceful in the beginning. Then this got transformed into a revolution, which happened first in the regional administrations. We remember how the governors where the crowds were indeed occupying the governmental buildings. Then it happened in Kiev. Then the several police stations and the army barracks were occupied, and even before the first blood was shed, there were armed people in the streets, and Kiev stopped being a safe city. And when our representatives went to sign the agreements which were violated by the Ukrainian authorities, our diplomats had to travel in cars with the foreign license plate and not Russian. This was and the people who were standing guarding the streets of Kiev were certainly not militiamen. So Mr. Yanukovych was told on an everyday basis, do not try to use force against the protesters. By that time, the protesters occupied the governmental buildings, and the coup d'etat in the Ukraine that ensued, that followed, and when our US colleagues like such a shift of power, they call it revolution. When they dislike it, they call it a coup d'etat. Well, clearly that the government in Kiev did not change in a legal way. let alone the violation and the breach of the agreements that we signed with our Western colleagues. And clearly that the power change was not legal. We qualified it as a coup d'etat, and I think that this is an accurate term for what happened in the Ukraine. Whereupon the events in the Western partners decided to deal a blow and to regulate or to install order in a military way. Well, clearly, we in Russia cannot like it. There may be people in Russia who did like it, but I think the majority of us here in Russia perceive the Ukraine as a fraternal country, and almost every person in Russia has a family association with Ukraine, and it's a great drama to almost all of us here in Russia. So I think that the West either subconsciously or consciously was supporting these movements in the Ukraine. But clearly what happened there was in some way a result of a situation which had been unfolding for almost 20 years, which indeed was a matter of linguistic assimilation or even attempts to rule out or to curb the Russian language and the Russian culture from the political life, and the transliteration and the Ukrainization. Alexander was written as Alexander. Pavel was becoming Pavlo, Dmitry was becoming Dimitro, Nikolai was becoming Mikola. There are just some examples of forceful assimilation. If we recourse to the legal practice of the European Court for Human Rights, we might recall that in 2007 the Strasbourg Court adopted a verdict whereby the names in the Ukraine cannot be changed arbitrarily without the specific consent of the actual physical bearers of these names. So in this sense, I think that such renamings or other examples or attempts to assimilate, and the European Court said that the Ukrainian language is the state language. Frankly, I still do not understand our Ukrainian colleagues what precluded them from having Nikolai, and why should it have been Ukrainicized. But I think that such foolish acts were always in a very strange way supported among some political circles in the West. Interpret such forceful change of names. I think that well, first of all, the north of Ireland and the Northern Ireland would have seceded immediately. Well, think about Canada. What would have happened if the Quebecois or the gens of Canada would have forcefully changed their names into Jones? I think that the reason why I'm saying that is that the countries with such great complexity of ethnic background and such great complexity of linguistic background, great care must be exercised to deal with the ethnic and linguistic differences. I think that in this sense, the British are acting very sensibly by the great educational costs that they incur to support the Scottish system of education, unlike the Ukrainian government, which hardly ever supported the Russian culture in their own country. So a lot of foolish acts committed by the previous governments led to a very complex situation, and I think that it will take a very long time, many years, for this situation to get better. And then, of course, thousands of people got killed, and the blood is not easily forgotten. And of course, there is without the support of our Western colleagues, there would be no such a great military chaos. I don't think that Mr. Turchinov would have been able to start this war without the support of our Western colleagues. So I think that unfortunately it will be a very long way before we can extricate ourselves from this crisis. Well, the school deliberates about different topics and themes, but to me it is interesting what is the question about political activity, the concept of political activity. What is this demarcation line between the civic standing or the civic actions of a citizen and the political activity? We remember that many citizens in the Soviet times were repressed for their civic acts. I know that many foundations may lobby lawmaking, but they do that for specific non-political purposes. But if we take the events in the Ukraine, then I think that there were citizens, and in my view, there was indeed violence on the part of the government to chase away the rally. So where is that demarcation line that a citizen may not cross or may not trespass? Well, I think we have different viewpoints of the Ukrainian events. You've seen that a peaceful demonstration was decimated, but in my view, weeks before that happened, the policemen and the military guards were attacked with the Molotov cocktails. So I don't think that in the political battle you should not be throwing Molotov cocktails. Then this is not politics. This is more of a this is a certain banditry, and I think that there is no defense. There is no way to justification. There are no justifications for what was happening in Kiev in those days. I think that the Ukrainian government of that day was not should not have allowed this to happen, and I think that in the place of Yanukovych, I would have shown decision, and the willing. I would have been willing to use force because there may be people who are willing to sign association agreement with the EU. There are those who do not want to sign this agreement. But if any dog, any person attacks the police or those who guard, if anybody casts a stone into a policeman or a Molotov cocktail, or if then I will order armed containment of such riots. And I think that President Yanukovych must have done that, because the first scoundrel who threw a Molotov cocktail into the policeman must have been shot. He did not do that. As a result, the violence went out of every measure. And clearly that the Ukrainian government wants to support one thing, and this is quite difficult to collect all the materials. But all of us saw the Molotov cocktails being thrown into the police and the buildings of the regional and federal authorities were occupied, and the policemen and the military were beaten. This is not politics. I cannot call this politics. A peaceful demonstration is different. I think this may be a civil or a political position. But street riots, every government in every country starts to protect itself. Can you imagine a governor from any office or thrown out of his or her office and chained to the radiator? The government must protect itself. Such violence would not have been tolerated in any country, and the US government is extremely strong-handed in dealing with such riots. With all the developed democracy in the United States, there are some incidents and episodes of violence. We should remember, the story of the African American young men killed, but this still does not allow for the violence against the police and the guards. No. Yes, this is hard to disagree with that. However, I cannot help noting that I disagree entirely with your position, and indeed I have to say that. But we spoke about the different moments. The first decimation of the so-called Euromaidan happened on November the 30th. There were only several hundreds of people who lived in the tents, and then there were. And was anybody killed? No, they were beaten, but the next day 1 million people went to the streets. Within 1.5 months, this confrontation was not violent. Then the laws of the 16th of January were taken, and there was 1 month and 30 days, 1.5 month elapsed between the first use of force by the government and the cocktails of Molotov. But when the Molotov cocktails are thrown into the military, this is an assault. This is an assault to murder. This is an attempt to murder. Well, if the government resorted to the use of force, and people were beaten, it is bad. But when the crowd started to throw Molotov cocktails, then the crowd started doing that. And I think that the government must pacify the situation, even when the marginals from the crowd start to use weapons, then the government must do something about it. So the bacchanalia was evolving, and yeah, 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 indeed, yeah. I am not going to argue with that, yeah, but that's fine. But there, of course, there are many questions about the Ukraine. About one half of these questions have already been answered by you. But there are also many questions about Crimea. Alexander Bilichanin from Novosibirsk, Sergei Teluhin from Yaroslavl. Is it? Do you believe that President Putin took the decisions for the Crimea, or was it a more collective decision? Well, President Putin told about this in the recent film, the documentary. Well, I do not have to repeat what he said in this film, but I think that there was a formal and informal sides to this decision. And when President Putin took this decision, he had to guide himself with certain circumstances, which was the situation in the Ukraine, the situation in the Crimea, and the general public opinion in Russia. I have not worked for the Kremlin for many years by now, and I do not know for certain who was he speaking with or discussing this with among his colleagues, but he is certainly the person who assumed the political responsibility for taking this decision. So, formally speaking, this was about this decision was supported by the majority of the population, and secondly by the parliament, as far as Russia is concerned. In Crimea, the referendum took place. We can speak about the circumstances of this referendum, but it is clear to me that the absolute majority of the Crimean population voted for it. When our Western colleagues say that how come that in the 21st century part of one territory, part of the territory of one state was assumed by another country. However, our Western colleagues always have a great substantiation for their politics. If you take the example of Kosovo, they take decisions where the revolutions are democratic, and where the events should be classified as coup d'etat. But indeed, there are not many territories in the world history where parts of the territory were made a gift by one part of the country to another part of the country, or by one republic to another republic, as was the case with the Crimea. When one republic of the USSR, without asking the opinion of those who lived in this territory, the people in the Crimea were never asked about it, and the status of Crimea as an accidental gift was creating a precedent for this historical episode. The foolish act of the Ukrainian government with respect to the Russian population of the Crimea, and indeed the assimilation policies of assimilation did not foster the integration of Crimea into the Ukraine. Finally, the coup d'état in Kiev and the actual threat of a military conflict with great casualties because of the possible military confrontation between the nationalistic part of the Ukrainian society and those who live in the Crimea. All of these circumstances became the basis of a decision which allowed us to avoid shedding of blood, and this was a reaction to the illegal shift of power in Kiev, and this had indeed some historical basis. So this gift that was made by one republic to another within the USSR was a cause and source of great anger of the majority of those who live in Crimea, which of course culturally speaking, people in Crimea believe themselves to be a part of Russia. Well, Russia does not. History does not tolerate the subjunctive. We know that. But even though history does not tolerate the would-be's, but if it were not for the coup d'etat in Kiev, and if it were not for the circumstances which were totally beyond our control, I think that still Crimea at this historical stage could remain a part of the Ukrainian state. If there had been this explosion in Kiev, there would have been no referendum in Crimea. Then a question from Novosibirsk: what is the difference between Crimea and Donbass? There was a referendum that took place in Donbass. Well, it is not about. I think that I see a great difference between the east of the Ukraine and Crimea, Donetsk and Lugansk regions, and Crimea. These eastern parts of the Ukraine entered the composition of the Ukrainian Republic in the beginning of the 1920s. This is almost a 100-year of history, and people who live there, the majority of people who live there, being a part of the Ukraine, was quite organic, quite normal. Their grandfathers and fathers lived in the Ukraine. Yes, they are and have been and are interested in preserving their Russian heritage in terms of their language and these aspects of importance, but being a part of the Ukraine has never been repugnant to them. To the people in the Ukraine, because this was a much later story, Crimea never became a part of Crimea never became a true part of the Ukraine. I encountered this on more than one occasion, and people never got adapted or mentally used to the thought of being a part of Ukraine, not being a part of Russia. I was on a business trip to Crimea in 2002 and 2003. There were some Russian-Ukrainian negotiations, and I was there and walking the embankment of the city of Yalta in the evening. I just went for a walk, and it was a beautiful evening. So. And I was walking the embankment. Well, I never had a great problem of people coming to watch me. I've never been a celebrity, and but there are always politicized people who still can recognize your face. So somebody came to me, an elderly gentleman, came close, and he asked me if I'm Alexander Voloshin. I said yes, and so he took out a passport from his breast pocket, and he started saying, using some profanities. He said, "Look what they did to us. They renamed my deceased father," and he was reading his patronymic, which was forcefully changed by the registration authorities in Crimea. Take us away, take us back into the fold, bring us back into the fold. So this was, of course, I'm not. Yeah, and of course there were different people in Crimea, and of course there may have been people who were quite happy with the names of their parents and their own names changed. And I think that this terrible blow, however, was never coped with by those in the Crimea, and I think that this led to many of the events. Oh, indeed, in the traditions of the Russian Orthodox Church, names were changed in terms of the ecclesiastical tradition. But it is one thing when people do it in a voluntary way. And I think that there's a great difference between going to the church if you're a believer, but I think that here we're dealing with quite a different story, because the names were changed without asking, and this is a Russian-speaking area. There's a history. They have their culture. Why should they be assimilated? This is just a foolish act. This is just what I would call a chauvinist mistake by the authorities in Kiev that was committed for over 2 decades. In no other country would people stand this. Think about Northern Ireland, Scotland, or Quebec. And of course, these countries deal with problems every now and then. In Quebec, there are crises that recur every several decades, and even though Canada is a very prosperous and politically well-established country. Or let us take Scotland. So even in countries where the central government is specifically attentive to that, and indeed I think that the Canadian government is quite reasonable in dealing with the ethnic minorities. And any Canadian Prime Minister would say a couple of sentences in French at the beginning of his political address. So I don't think that in any of these developed countries would have happened if this assimilation policies were similar to those that were perpetrated in the Ukraine. So I think that the situation would have aggravated even if it were not for the crisis of 2014. Such mistakes are not forgiven in history. The whole situation would have degenerated sometime later, but it would have still gotten to this bitter end. How about Latvia? Latvia is Yevgeny's, they changed Ivanov's. Well, our time is up, but if I may get back to the format of the Moscow School of this these great disputes that people are having about Ukraine, I think there are no people to doubt the willingness of the Crimeans to reunify with Russia. But I think that this is in many ways a dispute about the procedure, because there are people who believe that means may justify, that ends do justify the means, and there are those who believe that ends do not justify the means. To me personally, as to many others, it would be proper to do it in a very procedurally transparent way, to do it in a proper and a public manner, even though you can do it in a more, even if you take this documentary about Crimea, there are a lot of staged sequences in this film, and many people do not understand why should you really stage so many things. So otherwise, I think that we shall have this problem. Yes, I mean, of course. I mean, we can talk about the procedures. I think that the quality was not particularly bad. I think that there was a great risk. There was a great risk for the situation to degenerate into bloodshed. But talking about the procedures, I think that eventually the question is if the public opinion was in any way falsified. I think that the public opinion was not falsified. I think that the referendum did reflect the innermost desire of the population of the Crimea to unify, to reunify with Russia. If it were possible to make a more transparent referendum, maybe it was possible, although it may have been very difficult. But I think that the delay would have led to the bloodshed, and this is the critically important thing. And there are, of course, many questions about the Ukraine, but let us really close this discussion. There are many different positions, and I cannot be quite agreeable with Svetlana. Oh yes, I agree. Many of our Western colleagues or partners, those who wish us good or ill, to us this is a very painful situation. With all due respect to the sovereignty of Ukraine, this indeed is a family matter. The Ukrainian crisis is a family matter for every one of us, and we relive this tragedy, this drama, as a terrible, terrible personal drama. So, however, when we talk about the historical justice, it is not our fault. It is not our guilt. We are not to blame for the degeneration of the situation in the Ukraine. You have said that indeed these terrible fractures happen in the families and in the Russian society at large. It is a major drama that we've been seeing in Russia over the past year. The great disputes, family feuds, the arguments and quarrels lead to a situation when people find great problems in communicating with each other, and they even disrupt in their relations. And a question from Tambov, from Mr. Karovin, is quite a simple question, and I think I've asked that before. I remember a question is indeed from me, from a blogger to a blogger. What is your strategy in dealing and talking to the social environment and to those in the social networks? Or indeed, is it mainly useless because the arguments or the quarrels or the arguments degenerate into quarrels? Well, I always like to talk to people who think differently. And I'm always interested in listening to the opinions of the other. It is my great pleasure to talk to intelligent people who think differently, who do not share my opinion. I do not in any way waste my time in such conversations, because I think that such talks allow us to enrich each other. And with respect to the social networks, I don't spend much time in online, but I don't ban many of my subscribers. It's either those who are insistent fools, and this is just a, there are some insistent fools who are saying foolish things, and you get really frustrated and you ban it. And the other one is indeed the caddy behavior. If somebody is bullying or is impolite, then I prefer to issue any further communication. If I can see that a person is expressing an opinion which is radically different from mine, but it does it in a polite way, I never ban him. So only fools and cads are banned. Well, I think that this meeting this meeting, this roundtable, this session is a great testimony to the culture of conducting a dialogue. However, there is one last question that I would like to ask, and this is a question about the 1999 explosions of the residential buildings in Moscow. How was the event of 1999, the blown ups, the explosions of the residential buildings? How was it perceived? How was it perceived in the Russian political class? Many of the criminal, I think about 5 volumes of this criminal case are still classified, which of course causes much rumor. 15 years have passed. Well, about talking about classified parts or classified volumes of this case, I've never followed this. What was happening at that time? What were the situation and the events in Dagestan? Before that, there was this enclave of the enclave in the Chechen Republic, which was not controlled from Moscow, and this was indeed a terrorist state. The slavery was practiced, banditry was rife, and why should I repeat the things which are quite open and quite clear to all observers. And then there was this attempt to contaminate Dagestan. The Dagestan was the initial place for the anti-terrorist operation to start, and when the separatists were indeed cleared away from Dagestan, there was a political decision to continue the military campaign into Chechnya. The situation was becoming more and more critical, and the border of Chechnya was quite transparent. So the military terrorism spilled into the Russian cities and localities, of which there were manifestations such as the terrorist acts in the Russian cities and towns. It may be that we were not particularly good in media coverage of such anti-terrorist operation, and indeed there is not much political tradition of media coverage. Unfortunately, we don't have a great tradition of public politics. And indeed, when I was worked in the Kremlin, public appearances were not quite comfortable to me. So I tried to avoid publicity. Our unreadiness to such public policies may have been expressed in the fact that some of the terrorist operations, or parts of the terrorist operations, were classified, and I'm 100% confident that these terrorist attacks, that there have never been any doubts that these were terrorist attacks, mainly from the Northern Caucasus. And I have no doubts that people in the special service and in the army tried to preclude such terrorist attacks from happening, but unfortunately our tendency for secrecy allowed the opponents of the government to criticize the government, or even blame these terrorist attacks on the government itself. Well, I'm a civil person, I'm a civil servant, I have been a civil servant, but because the situation was quite a military prone situation, I did take part in meetings, but I have never had any scruple of doubt that the critique or the terrible accusations against the FSB or other special security services were profoundly false. I think that the only thing which we did wrong was our tendency for secrecy, and the inability or the missing skills for media coverage. I've never had any doubts, or I know how many of the Russian officers from the FSB risked their lives. We remember all the casualties, and I think that it would not be proper, and it would not be correct to accuse them of those terrible crimes which they really didn't commit. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alexander Voloshin. The one question which is coming from many of our Evgeny Tishenko is asking about the Moscow Financial Center. Do you think that it will ever be reanimated? And because yes, I will answer this question about the Moscow Financial Center, or the World Financial Hub. This project is still in discussion. There are historically stable financial centers such as London and New York, and there are the centers which were indeed created deliberately, such as Frankfurt, such as our German colleagues who did it some 25 years ago. So the financial market was regulated, and this was then they started in Germany to reform the financial industry, and they started to foster the creation of this financial market. The country went through several crises, and this is certainly a very slow process. From the standpoint of Russia, why do we continue to talk about this even though the economic situation is quite critical and it is difficult to imagine Moscow becoming a great financial center in any time soon? However, everything that is done on the path towards creating such a center is quite positive. We have a big economy, we're a big country, we need to have a good and properly working stock exchange. We have to have a high quality financial infrastructure, well managed system, good system of state administration and civil service, and all of these things, including the integration of stock exchanges and creation of a state depository, the legislative acts, the lawmaking, all of these things are useful things, irrespective of the fact if Moscow is a great financial center at the moment. Secondly, because of the Soviet super centralization, Moscow is still a financial center. And I think that it's still a great financial center, at least for the purposes of a good part of the world, including the former USSR. Of course, we shall continue our work. We shall continue to improve the financial legislation, and we shall develop our stock exchanges. We shall continue to solidify our position and our financial infrastructure. If this occurs in the future, if the financial center does originate in Moscow, we will say that we did the right thing. So indeed, we shall continue with that. Sveta, there are a million questions which I will not be able to ask, and I of course ask for the forgiveness of our the very last question, because it has been pending for a long time. It's a question from David Kamki from Krasnodar. Some time ago, there was a 2020 strategy forum 2020 and plan of 2020. We're only 5 years away from this date. What would you like to see happening in Russia in these 5 years to get us to 2020? And on the contrary, what threats do you see that you would like to avoid? Well, nothing threatens me, you know. I'm threatened by some military conflicts clear to our borders. That's true, but I think the situation is complex. It is complex politically, including the relations with our foreign partners. It is quite difficult economically, taking into account the mineral resources prices and our great dependence on the mineral rent. From the political side, I would certainly like to see a country in 5 years which would be integrated into the international community, a country that would have great and amiable relations with the majority of our partners abroad. This is not an easy task, taking into account the taking into account the events that have happened in the past year. However, we believe that it is a realistic task for the upcoming 5 years. I would certainly not wish to see an isolated country surrounded by enemies. In economic terms, I think one of our major problems is that of a poor business climate, which we have to improve, which is a long-term perspective, a long-term task. And in part, this is a task which has to be attended daily, such as stability in regulation, and our bureaucracy is very active. It wants to be very active. The rules of the game are changing too often. But I would certainly recommend my colleagues to be a lot more consistent in their lawmaking zeal. So in 5 years, I would like to see a country with a much better business climate, which would allow to diversify the economy and to develop the mid and small scale business. Because with poor business climate, the oil and gas production and primary refinings will still take place, but all other economy, the economy based on knowledge, financial processes, the high tech, these are all things which are extremely sensitive to the business climate. So I think that poor business climate leads to conservation and the precludes the economy from diversifying. And then, of course, the small and mid-sized business. The large business can defend itself, but the small and medium-sized businesses are quite defenseless. And of course, the major task is to improve the business climate. I would like to see that happening in 5 years. Thank you so very much, Alexander Stalovic. Thank you. No more questions. No more questions. But there will be a request. No questions, but a request. The question. The book by Richard Pearl is a very good book which tells how presidential administration works, or the staff works. So we decided to. You recommended to read this book, and while you think I would like to Dmitry Trenin wrote a preface to the Russian edition, and he said that the book of Richard Pearl persuades us that living humans and not abstract forces create history. And of course, people know what they do, but they don't know what will be the results of their deeds. As a result, 1914, 1917, and 1989 and 1991 all become possible. Between these dates, we have the 20th century. But what is important about the Cold War is that the Cold War did not emanate into a hot war. And at least we hope for history to continue. Would you agree with these words of preface? Well, I think that this is a very good preface to this book, and Dmitry Trenin is a very talented person. Richard Pearl is also a very talented person. is a great author, and I read it. But I think that in many ways it is about us. Of course, there are different specifics between us and differences between us and the Americans, but there are many things which are in common. And indeed, who should I send this book as a gift? I think no, I wouldn't make a choice. Maybe should I send it to one of our attendants and participants who has asked many questions but not got an answer. Now, I think this is a very good book. This is, yeah. Thank you very much, Alexander Voloshin, and we hope we shall continue with this series of I-forum roundtables, and we certainly hope to have you with us again. Would like to thank Mark Dadian for the interpreting. Would like to thank Alexei Shmilyov, and we wish him a happy birthday. And I would like to thank Alexander Voloshin for inaugurating this I-forum. Thank you. Thank you for this great evening, and thank you for your questions. They're all fairly interesting. Thank you for your attention. We hope to continue. Have a good evening. We will see each other on next Sunday.